Dear colleagues, would you please take your seats so that we can continue our meeting? The sitting is open. As we agreed earlier this morning, we will now hear an address by the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Denys Sjmyhal. That you are joining us virtually today. And your citizens. This morning at the opening of the extraordinary session, we observed a minute of silence in memory of all those victims of this war of aggression, which should never have started and which should now stop immediately. The moments you and your citizens are living through are devastating due to the brutal military aggression of our member state Russia against our member state Ukraine. For this blatant violation of the Statute of the Council of Europe, Russia has been suspended from its rights of representation in the Council of Europe. Our extraordinary session, which we started this morning and will last until tomorrow evening, will further discuss the consequences of this aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine and formulate a statutory opinion at the request of our Committee of Ministers. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm now honored to give you the floor.
Thank you so much. Шановний пане президент, шановна пані генеральна секретарка Ради Європи, шановні члени асамблеї. Дякую за запрошення виступити перед асамблеєю і донести до кожного з вас голос українського народу, голос близько 100 націй і 100 національностей з різних куточків України, східних та західних, північних і південних областей України, вільних і тимчасово, на жаль, окупованих.
Those areas that are free and those that unfortunately have been occupied. The voices of children and women who now have to hide in bomb shelters. And of course the voices of our military people who courageously for 18 days now have been resisting the Russian aggressors. The voices that for the past 3 years not everyone has heard or didn't want to hear, as they wanted to do business as usual with the aggressor. In spite of numerous violations by them of the international law and of the human values. Getting When Russia was brought back, the Russian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly back in 2019, where you're gathering now, once again showed a poor understanding by the world of the real threat that Putin's regime is. Then Europe chose the road of pacifying the aggressor rather than defending the values, democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. For the past 18 days, the world finally opened up the eyes. We never closed our eyes, not for a second. 18 days of this open war, thousands of deaths, the loss of almost 90 children, thousands of Ukrainians without any food, any water, any heat, destruction of hundreds of schools, hospitals that have been shelled, nuclear power plants on the brink of a disaster. And that's at the time when Russia, according to the Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, vowed that it would promote the right to life and defend any person from unlawful violence. Dear members of the Assembly, the right to life is one of the key fundamental rights. And today, at the center of Europe, this right is being violated every minute and every second. For the leaders of the Russian Federation, there are no values at all. The Russian armed forces behave like terrorists. They bombard schools, kindergartens, hospitals. They kill children. They take them hostages. They kidnap representatives of the local authorities. They torture civilians, and all of that started 18 days ago. Violation of those fundamental rights and freedoms by Russia since the very beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine was discussed by the Assembly dozens of times. In the territories under Russian control, for 8 years, systemic reprisals have continued against anyone who does not agree with the aggressors. And today the Russian government is mobilizing the residents of Crimea to the armed forces of Russia, forcing people who are to be protected by the Fourth Geneva Convention to serve in the armed forces of the enemy state. A Russian military pilot is dropping bombs on his own mother in Poltava region. It's hard to believe that, but even such crazy things become a normal life for the aggressors. Every day we receive more and more news about violation of the freedom of speech, the right to live, to labor, to have medical services and education. All those actions have to be properly assessed by the international community. Dear members of the Assembly, today Russia is saying that there is no war, that nobody has declared this war, they're just conducting it. At this time, they're calling it a special military operation. We have confirmed information that more than 12,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, 389 tanks, 1,249 APCs, 77 fighter jets, 90 helicopters. I'm convinced that among you there are former military people. Just ask them whether in history there have ever been such special military operations that would have such consequences for a country that initiates this kind of military operation. Those flows of lie and hatred that are disseminated by the Russian media, the Russian propaganda, have to be stopped. Russian fakes have to be stopped that are trying to establish those lies in the Russian society. I can tell you that Russia and President Putin have started a full-scale war in the center of Europe that can become a third world war. Starting 2014, Ukraine has asked not to bring the Russian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, not to bring them back. Today, the Russian delegation has stopped its work with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I'm sure that this just reflects Putin's wish to avoid punishment and to restrict, to put an end to thousands of complaints and applications by Ukrainian citizens for all the crimes that he and his people have committed against Ukraine for the past 8 years. But we all know that punishment for genocide and terrorism cannot be avoided. And we have to be tough in our response. We demand that a decision is approved to immediately oust Russia from the Council of Europe. The ones who definitely support this non-provoked and unjustified aggression cannot stay in the single European family where human life is the highest value. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine is on fire. Hundreds of houses have been built. We're short of water, of light, of heat for millions of our people. We need to join our efforts, not only to protect, to defend Ukraine, but to defend all of Europe today. We need to stop the aggression until a nuclear disaster comes in, until all of Europe is on fire. So, of course, we are asking, we are demanding to close the skies over Ukraine, to close the sky for the sake of the millions of people in Ukraine, for the sake of European and world security. And at the end, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart to all the neighboring countries, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, Lithuania, and other countries of Europe for their support that they have given to our women and children. To all those who, on a temporary basis, have to look for shelter in your countries, and those who have found shelter, who have found warmth, hospitality, attention, all these values that are joined, that our common European family is rich with. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your solidarity, for your position, the solidarity that you are showing us. Glory to Ukraine, glory to free and democratic Europe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. This assembly is not used to loud applause. Therefore, I think you can take this unanimous applause of this assembly as a sign of our support for the government of Ukraine, its authorities, and especially the citizens of your now beleaguered country. I thank you from the bottom of my heart that you took the time to brief you under very difficult circumstances, as we are all aware, about what is happening in Ukraine and the need that international solidarity, which is now seen and shown, has to remain and has to be strengthened. In this meeting of the Parliamentary Assembly, we will now examine the question posed to us by the Committee of Ministers whether Article 8 of our statute, written down already in 49, has to be further applied, which could lead to the exclusion of a member state of the Council of Europe for the first time ever in modern history. As you pointed out quite clearly, there is not only that the Russian army has crossed the borders of Ukraine in an illegal and an aggressive way, but it also has crossed the red lines of this organization. And that will not be without consequences. The precise measure, size of these consequences, as said, will be debated now and in the coming hours and tomorrow. May I again thank you May I wish you strength and wisdom and courage. You have to be aware that not only the Council of Europe, but I think the vast majority of the international community stands with you and stands up against aggression by the biggest state on earth, who has shown to understand so little about international law and civilization. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Stay safe and sound, and we wish you, your government, and your people well. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the communication from the Committee of Ministers to the Assembly, presented by Mr. Benedetto della Vedova, Under Secretary of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. This will be followed by questions to Mr. della Vedova. Now, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Benedetto della Vedova, Under Secretary of State, speaking on behalf of the Presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. Mr. della Vedova, we are very pleased to have you with us today in this exchange of views. The Italian Presidency of the Committee of Ministers has indeed at a very difficult time for Europe and humanity. After the pandemic crisis in Europe, the Italian presidency is now facing this blatant violation of the statute of the Council of Europe from one member state against another. I would thank you for the effective cooperation, the communication and the dialogue between the Assembly and the Committee of Ministers and the Secretary General of the organization, especially since the beginning of the military aggression by the Russian Federation. And I would like to thank you for that. The consolidation of discussions and consultations within the trialogue format is ensuring our coordination and increases the impact of our work and allows us, together with the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, to remain united around our common values. Mr. Under Secretary, today we are here in this extraordinary session to discuss one of the most severe challenges that the European continent has faced. The military aggression by the Russian Federation towards Ukraine needs a coordinated response from all over the Council of Europe based on the core values of our work: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We are looking forward to hear your intervention and the exchange of views with our members of the Assembly. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Signor Presidente dell'Assemblea Parlamentare.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Madam Secretary General of the Council of Europe, members, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by joining your words of support to the Ukrainian Prime Minister. When I spoke to the first part session this year of the Parliamentary Assembly on the 25th of January, I reasserted Italy's conviction and my personal conviction that the Council of Europe is a fundamental part of the collective effort to counter global challenges. It is the continental emblem of the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and it is the expression of a multilateral vocation with which Italy fully identifies. We meet today just a couple of weeks after an attack was launched by Russia on Ukraine. This is a premeditated attack, despite the fact that until the very last minute, the Russian authorities talked about exercises on the border. We have seen and continue to see that a Council of Europe member state has attacked and invaded another member state and is killing its civilians. This appalling war of aggression, which is unprovoked, unjustified, and unjustifiable, is against all the most elementary norms of international law and considerations of humanity, is continuing to cause one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in Russia since the end of the Second World War, and perhaps the worst. The Russian offensive is continuing without cessation and in open violation of the norms of international humanitarian laws. It is striking children, women, old people, sick people, handicapped people, hospitals and schools and other civilian infrastructure indiscriminately. Civilian and critical infrastructure, including nuclear infrastructure, and causing appalling suffering to the people of Ukraine. The Russian Federation and Belarus, its ally in this appalling military campaign, is fully responsible for what is happening. And those who are responsible, those in charge and those who are carrying this out, will have to account for their crimes. And therefore we were pleased to see the decision of the International Criminal Court's Prosecutor General to open motu proprio, an inquiry into the war crimes committed in Ukraine, and the evidence is already being collected. We also welcomed the fact that the European Court of Human Rights was triggered by the Ukrainian government to identify individual measures against the Russian Federation. Italy has also firmly supported initiatives promoted by Ukraine as part of the UN Council of Human Rights in order to denounce the appalling impact on human rights of this situation and to stress the accountability for the violations. We have been supporting and promoting the setting up of a fact-finding mission on violations and human rights abuses and the violation of humanitarian law in the context of this Russian aggression. At the OSCE, we have welcomed the triggering of the Moscow mechanism in the human dimension, which will see an independent expert mission sent to gather information and proof of violations and abuses committed by the Russian Federation in this war against the Ukrainian people. I would like to recall as well the appeal made by the leaders of the European Union at the European Council in Versailles, an appeal to the Russian Federation fully to respect its commitments under international humanitarian law, to guarantee safe humanitarian access and unimpeded access to victims and IDPs, and providing safe passage for civilians who wish to leave the country. Faced with this barbarity, which reminds us of the worst pages of the Second World War, the international community was unable to remain indifferent. The broadness of the political and diplomatic front against Moscow has been demonstrated by the United Nations General Assembly resolution approved on the 2nd of March with a majority of 141 votes, with only 5 votes against. And these are numbers that add to the almost unanimous condemnation of the whole world at what is happening in Ukraine. And it is revealing that even countries such as Cuba and China did not align themselves with Moscow, but abstained. The Council of Europe is the repository and custodian of the fundamental principles of coexistence, respect of human rights, the promotion of democracy and of the rule of law. And it has not remained indifferent. Quite the opposite. It has been at the forefront of efforts to ensure a rapid, cohesive and firm reaction. On the 25th of February, the day following the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian armed forces, the Committee of Ministers, currently presided over by Italy, adopted an exceptional decision. It voted the immediate suspension of the rights of representation at the Council of Europe on behalf of the Russian Federation with reference to the Committee of Ministers and to your Assembly. The committee took this decision considering that the military attack against Ukraine means that the Russian Federation had gravely violated Article 3 of the statutes of the Council of Europe. This is an unprecedented decision in the history of our organization, made, as the President of the Assembly has just stated, made necessary by the situation of exceptional gravity. On the 2nd of March, the Committee of Ministers adopted an urgent resolution setting out the numerous legal and financial consequences of the suspension of the Russian Federation. On the 10th of March, the Committee of Ministers adopted a further decision launching a consultation with the Parliamentary Assembly. Today and tomorrow, you are called upon to express your indications, which, although not binding, will be precious for our future decisions. As things stand, the only reaction from the Russian authorities has been the discursive note, also dated 10th of March, of the Foreign Minister Lavrov, in which he states, inter alia, that from now on, and I quote, Russia will no longer take part in this attempt by NATO and the European Union to turn Europe's oldest organization into a place where the mantras of the West supremacy and narcissism will be exalted. Let them have fun by themselves, said the minister, without the company of Russia, end of quotation. And this has not yet been followed up upon. Prior to this, the Committee of Ministers had already condemned very firmly the armed aggression against Ukraine and had urged the Russian Federation immediately and unconditionally to cease its military operations, reasserting our unwavering commitment to the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, from the beginning of the crisis, the Italian presidency of the Committee of Ministers has acted in close coordination with the Parliamentary Assembly and with the Secretary General. Tripartite statements on the 8th of March and the 15th of February demonstrate our firm commitment to the fact that this organization can speak with a single voice faced with this appalling war and this pitiless attack by the Russian government on the principles and values with which we identify. In this context, may I recall that the Joint Committee met the same morning as the Committee of Ministers when the decision to suspend the Russian Federation was adopted. That meeting provided the opportunity for the representatives of 46 governments to hear the opinions of the leaders of the political groups and other members of your assembly. Above all, it underlined the convergence of opinion between our committee and your assembly on the suspension of the Russian Federation. I would like to express my deep gratitude to President Cox for this excellent collaboration. Over and above the joint statements, the Italian presidency considers that it is essential to keep open a constant channel of contact with you, Mr. President, in order to ensure the cohesion and unity of our action. In a crisis situation such as that which we are passing through, it is essential for the two bodies of the Council of Europe to work jointly. We very much hope that the dialogue between the three institutions will be deepened when it comes to promoting or to continuing our decisions on further initiatives to be taken at the Council of Europe, carefully evaluating and in a unified fashion the impact of our decisions on the future of the citizens and the rights which we defend. Following not only the statutory obligations, but also because of our sincere conviction of the absolute point and use of close cooperation with the Assembly, we will listen closely to this debate here, and we are prepared to listen to and draw upon the results of your contribution in the Committee of Ministers on subsequent measures to be undertaken. This debate will immediately start after the that debate will start immediately after the exceptional meeting of the Assembly on the 17th of March. Our presidency will necessarily take account of the paths and indications and assessments which emerge from this session in the shaping of its own presidential programme and events planned here up to the 20th of May. The firmness of our reaction and the extraordinary political value of the commitment of all of us in charge of this organisation and the values which it represents do not diminish the sadness and indeed desolation that we feel, desolation at the appalling, terrible suffering of the Ukrainian people and the huge number of victims of this conflict, especially women and children, and sadness because the action of the Russian Federation has been a huge blow, but we hope not final blow, to our ambition of setting up a common European home and a community of strong, ever stronger democracies. I'd like to recall that the Council of Europe's Vienna summit in 1993 saw the heads of state and government of our member states declare that Europe is the source of immense hope which must in no event be destroyed by territorial ambitions, the revival of aggressive nationalism, the perpetuation of spheres of influence, intolerance or totalitarian ideologies. End of quote. These words are full of hope and determination, and they must guide our action and our future decisions, which means that the Council of Europe has worked tirelessly to keep this hope alive, and together we have set up a system to protect human rights and democracy which is unique in the world. It provides guarantees and hopes to the millions of citizens of Council of Europe member states, including the citizens of the Russian Federation. The huge responsibilities of the government of the Russian Federation must not diminish the absolute need to pay proper attention to the consequences of the measures which we adopt on the system of guarantees that the Council of Europe has built in order to protect the rights of all Europe's citizens. It is for us to continue the work underway without forgetting that our ultimate aim is to uphold the ideals of peace and justice on which the Council of Europe is based and which have been so appallingly overturned. These are the ideals which must guide us and inspire us as we face the terrible humanitarian situation which has come about. Almost 3 million refugees fleeing from Ukraine, according to the UNHCR, and 1.8 million internally displaced people. And it is the Ukraine Protection Cluster that gives us these figures. Italy is prepared to continue to the international effort and commitment to assist Ukraine and neighboring countries to cope with the difficulties caused by these huge flows of refugees and IDPs. We will make every effort to provide support, and we are committed to responding to the financial appeal made by the United Nations in order to manage the Ukrainian crisis. Italy has already welcomed about 28,000 people fleeing the fighting, and our commitment will continue to be supportive and concrete, and it will be in keeping with the spirit of welcome that has always characterized Italy's action in terms of migration in the European context. In this hall, I would like to recall the extraordinary commitment and the extraordinary efforts to welcome people made by Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Republic of Moldova, and Romania, that have provided help for Ukrainian refugees. This is a demonstration of their profound humanity and solidarity in the spirit of belonging that brings us together in the Council of Europe. Alongside the efforts being made and the implementation of existing instruments, Italy has also promoted innovative solutions in order to cope with this emergency. For instance, the use of property that is confiscated from organized crime. And this is something which is currently underway. These structures, once appropriate verifications of suitability have been carried out, will soon be available to be used. More than 110 million euros have been provided for the Ukrainian budget. And we have talked about the urgent measures in the humanitarian context, which will be undertaken on a multilateral basis. In this context, Italy is ensuring its own support for the multilateral organizations active in Ukraine and in the region in order to provide assistance to the most vulnerable amongst us. Over and above the €1 million that has been provided for the ICRC, immediately following the beginning of the Russian invasion, the Russian military invasions, military operations, we have looked at providing €25 million as a response to the appeals presented by the United Nations and the International Red Cross. This is a package to contribute to alleviating the suffering of millions of Ukrainians in difficulty, both inside the country and in neighboring countries. These financial contributions go alongside donations of assistance and material donations which required complex logistical operations. We have provided the Italian Red Cross with 5 tons of sanitary health kits. And also on the 7th of March, we sent out material to the base, the United Nations base in Brindisi. This is a cargo of about 20 tons of humanitarian material, which will soon reach a center in Poland. In this spirit, Italy will continue to provide its contribution and to support this effort in order to make sure that we achieve an immediate ceasefire and effective humanitarian measures to mitigate tangibly the appalling suffering faced by Ukrainians. And it is terrible to see how the organizations of civil society and a multitude of ordinary citizens in our own countries, it's wonderful to see how they are welcoming refugees and making an attempt to provide relief for them. This is a wonderful thing to witness. As said in Versailles last week, we must praise the Ukrainian people for the courage demonstrated to defend their own country and shared values of freedom and democracy. Italy, holding the presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, will not leave you alone. Thank you, President.
Assembly. And the applause may show that we really appreciate that. As I said in the beginning of this session, our session has 2 components. Today, it's the moment to gather information. Tomorrow, it is the moment to discuss and debate and to decide upon the information that we received. So I'm grateful for the information we got from the Prime Minister of Ukraine and your information, Mr. Undersecretary, and later we will get the information from our General Secretary of the Council of Europe. In order to save time and to give as many as possible people the floor, I now first ask the representatives on behalf of the political groups to ask their question of information and then you answer on the 5 of them together. First, I call on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens, Madam Selim Sayık-Böke from Turkey. You have the floor, Selim.
Thank you very much. This one? Okay. So thank you very much. Dear Mr. Undersecretary, I welcome you on behalf of the Socialist Democrats and Greens group at a time of devastating destruction with millions bearing immense uncertainty. We as a group have emphasized that it is time for crystal clarity in defending the core values of our very own organization. And in this capacity, we have 2 questions. First, given once again a dire humanitarian crisis we face, and given the unfortunate prospects of it prolonging, what further concrete steps does the Committee of Ministers plan to take to ensure those who are seeking refuge actually have access to their basic needs and rights, and that the responsibility is fairly and equally shared across Europe? The second question is, once the immediate, necessary and decisive steps are taken by the organization, what could be the further and future role of the Council of Europe, according to your discussions, to rebuild peace, to make sure that such aggression does not repeat itself?
Thank you very much, Selim, also to sticking to the time. Next, I call in the debate on behalf of the EPP group, Davor Ivo Stier from Croatia. Davor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Il Partito Popolare Europeo condanna fermamente l'aggressione della Federazione Russa contro l'Ucraina.
We condemn the invasion by Europe, and tomorrow we will be taking steps in our group. We would like to see rapid response on, we are pleased to see the rapid response on the part of the Council of Ministers.
Prevent any possible spill in other corners of Europe. And in this sense, the Western Balkans are always a very sensitive area. Can we expect the Italian presidency to, for example, further encourage Bosnia and Herzegovina to reform the electoral law in order to prevent instabilities? And do you envisage probably some other further activities in order to protect democracy and human rights in this region? Thank you.
Thank you, Davor. And now I call in the debate on behalf of the ECDA group, Christopher Chope from the United Kingdom. Chris, you have the floor. Microphone, Chris.
Sorry, it's technology, okay. Sir, can you give us an assurance that the Committee of Ministers at its meeting on the Thursday, the 17th of March, will vote to immediately exclude the Russian Federation from membership of the Council of Europe? And if not, why not? Surely the time for procrastination is over.
Thank you, Chris. Next, I call in the debate on behalf of the ALDE group, Mr. Rick Daams from Belgium. Rick, you have the floor online.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, dear colleagues. Words matter, but action matters more today. As ALDE group, we welcome what we have done, but we think that we can do more, we can do much more. As you flagged in your intervention, you said that more measures are needed. So my first question would be, what are the measures that you are thinking about as Committee of Ministers? But more importantly, as far as I'm concerned and ALDE Group is concerned, all actions taken should be concerted, coordinated and synchronized between the statutory bodies, which is the Committee of Ministers, which is the Assembly and the Secretary General. Do you consider it appropriate and needed that we set up a task force of these three, associating, if need be, the Congress and even our own bank, in order to develop an additional set of measures that would address this terrible situation, put them into practice in a very transparent way, and make sure that all three of us always act together? So do you think that it's appropriate to set up a task force to take this on? Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And now, last in the list of speakers on behalf of the political groups, I call Mr. André Hunko from the UEL group from Germany. André, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, Herr Staatssekretär. Diese Versammlung ist sehr einig in der Verurteilung.
Thank you very much, President. Under Secretary of State, I think this chamber is very united on this issue, including my own political group. We agree that there is a need to provide humanitarian assistance to help out refugees, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, I would have a question to put to you. The Committee of Ministers, what leeway, what possibilities would it still have in order to influence a ceasefire, to bring about a ceasefire, to bring about de-escalation, to avoid further escalation? Is that a possibility open to the Committee of Ministers? Are there any discussions? Thank you.
respond to these 5 remarks from the political groups.
Grazie. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
By Ms. Book. The Council of Europe has a wide range of instruments, conventions, including the European Convention on Human Rights and Bodies, Human Rights Commissioner, European Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, to help and guide member states in
Mr. Undersecretary, please ask again for the floor because you were disconnected. Yes, we have you back.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I start from the beginning. The answer to the question from Ms. Book. I was saying that the Council of Europe has a wide range of instruments, conventions, including the European Convention on Human Rights and Bodies, Human Rights Commissioner, European Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, to help and guide member states in providing appropriate reception facilities and proper assistance to refugees. The Committee of Ministers recently decided to step up cooperation with other international organizations, including UNHCR. Allow me to recall that the Council of Europe was created after World War II. Its raison d'etre is peace and solidarity among the peoples of Europe. All the Council of Europe's instruments are geared towards this goal. The Council of Europe has been pursuing an ideal of peace for more than 70 years with those states that so desire. Indeed, it is because the Russian Federation has distanced itself from this ideal by attacking Ukraine that we have to collectively suspend it from our organization. La seconda domanda di Ivo Stier.
I'd like to reply to the second question put by the representative, the Croatian representative of the EPP. I'd like to say that the Italian presidency condemns and will continue to condemn any and every attempt to discredit the Council of Europe. We are aware that launching a war against another country means that the aggressor will use the media as a weapon, and the best way to react is calm and firmness and working together in keeping with the Council of Europe's statute. The rule of law is a way of responding to the aggression, and member states must continue to be cohesive on common values and on the commitments that emerge from being a member of the Council of Europe. And the Russian Federation must recall that a suspended member cannot take part in our debate, but while it is suspended, it is nevertheless held to the rules of the organization. As regards what has been mentioned about Bosnia and Herzegovina, I visited Sarajevo a few weeks ago. This was a bilateral visit, but on that occasion I had the opportunity to speak with a number of interlocutors on the question of electoral reform and elections. And my hope is, I think this is very important for the stability of Bosnia and Herzegovina, I hope that there will be a rapid shared process of reform of electoral legislation. I also hope that it will be possible to hold elections at the date already fixed, because postponing the elections could give rise to a more difficult situation, a situation more difficult to control. And I recalled this for the benefit of the interlocutors and in order sincerely to achieve the reform of electoral legislation and the holding of the elections as already on the date already decided.
From the United Kingdom, the issue of the activation of Article 8 is a top priority for the Committee of Ministers, which met already 7 times since the beginning of the crisis. On February 25th, the Committee of Ministers decided to suspend the rights of representation of the Russian Federation, as we said. The Committee of Ministers will not refrain from its commitment to evaluating all possible further steps in the implementation of Article 8. The Committee of Ministers attaches the utmost importance to the opinion that the Parliamentary Assembly will deliver tomorrow. A meeting of the Committee of Ministers has been convened on Thursday to examine your opinion as a matter of urgency. If an expulsion decision is taken, it's not for the presidency to decide when this decision will come into force. The decision is to be taken collectively by the 46 member states. As of now, all options are possible, of course, including expulsions. And we will wait also for the decision, the resolution that you are going to approve tomorrow. On the question raised by Mr. Rick Dems from the ALDE, the Council of Europe's support is primarily political and institutional. The Committee of Ministers acted very quickly, not only to suspend Russia, but also to express the Council of Europe's support for the Ukrainian authorities and our solidarity with the population. The Council of Europe has adopted a very ambitious action plan in Ukraine to support the country's efforts in its democratic reforms. Russia's military aggression has inevitably led to the suspension of its implementation. As soon as it is possible to take up our work, this action plan will be rediscussed and reoriented to address the new situation. Council of Europe is not a humanitarian organization. However, initiatives are being taken to alleviate the suffering of people without interfering with the work of humanitarian agencies. The Development Bank of the Council of Europe has already adopted measures, including grants, to help member states in providing assistance to Ukrainian refugees. Council of Europe has a wide range of instruments, including ECHR, Human Rights Commissioner, European Committee for Prevention, as I told before, of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, to help and guide member states in bringing proper assistance to the refugees. Well, about the task force, I got the point. I think that so far the coordination and cooperation among the 3 bodies of the Council of Europe, I think it's okay. We are working together. But of course, if in the future we will see that the coordination or cooperation is not enough, we can think also about something called task force. But I can say I don't know if the President if the President agree with me that so far the coordination and cooperation is really okay and we work together. Thank you.
And the last question, you got the fifth question from Mr. Hunko.
Yes, sorry. About the de-escalation and ceasefire, of course we are following, but we are not involved in the negotiations that are taking place. First of all, the negotiation directly between two delegations from Ukrainian government and Russian government. We are following. We are ready to provide, if requested, any support in order to solve specific issues related to human rights. We are fully aware that the promotion of human rights and democracy and rule of law is in itself is a way to create conditions for a sound negotiation among the two counterparts. Of course, broadly speaking, we are following the attempt to provide a table of negotiation from Turkey or from Israel. Today in Rome, prominent figures from the Foreign Affairs Ministry from US and from China were here to discuss the issue. But of course, we are not directly involved. We are looking for a de-escalation, first of all, military one, a ceasefire, at least to allow people and humanitarian agency to go inside the cities and to save people. We are concerned for everybody, of course, but first of all, for disabled people that are suffering more than ever because of the difficulties for disabled people in cities that are bombarded and where the infrastructures are totally destroyed.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We only have time for 5 more questions, 1-minute questions. I first now call in the debate Mr. Pavlo Susko from the ECDA group. He's from Ukraine. Mr. Susko, you have the floor. He is not connected, so I go to la prochaine oratrice, Madame Nicole Tris de la France, au nom du...
The next speaker is Ms. Tris, on behalf of the ALDE Group. Thank you very much, President. Mr. Undersecretary, in starting this war, the Russian Federation has plunged our continent into an unpredictable situation. It is true that as of the 25th of February, the Russian Federation's representative rights were suspended and the European Court took interim measures calling upon the Russian authorities not to carry out military attacks against civilians and their homes, schools and hospitals. Sir, which initiatives does the Committee of Ministers intend to take in order to ensure that the court's decision is implemented, and more generally, which tangible action are you intending to carry out with the support of the Council in order to support Ukraine and its people? Thank you, Nicole.
From Lithuania, as a member of the EPP group. Emanuelis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, from my point of view, I would like to ask you only a few questions. It's related to our presence in Ukraine. Which type of missions you foresee we can send to the Ukraine and be there, let's say, using our instruments, our presentations inside of Ukraine, collecting materials now? That's my question to you. Thank you for everything what is done from Italian side. Secondly, I would like to represent to you the 27 European National Association of Children, doctors and nurses, together with more than 70 world academic leaders, about the situation of children in Ukraine. That is a terrible document. I would like to share with you what they collected, what's happened now with the children. And third one, I would like to ask you to say what Italy can do to maintain our democracy together. Well, it's now new democratic world is emerging from ruins of the Russian war against Ukraine, in solidarity with Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuelis. Now I give the floor to Mr. Arkadiusz Mulaczyk from Poland, and he's a member of the ECDA group. Arkadiusz, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, we must do everything what we can to stop the war. Sanctions against Russia are a very important element. As you see from the headlines and in the depth reports, the EU sanctions already implemented are still not enough, severe to stop criminal war aggression of Putin's Russia and Lukashenko Belarus. At the same time, there is a range of assets of many Russian oligarchs already frozen in accordance with the EU and US-American sanctions in order to make peace in Europe, restore Ukrainian territorial integrity, and save thousands of lives and extricate hundreds of thousands of children and women from incredible suffering. We should act decisively. Therefore, we should resolve as a peace and committees of ministers that the frozen assets of Russians and Belarusian oligarchs will be allocated to Ukrainian refugees as well as used to rebuild Ukrainian cities and villages, including totally destroyed by Russian criminals, hospitals, schools, and other things. Please take your position in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Arkadiusz. Now I call Mr. Pieter Omtzigt from the Netherlands. In the debate, he is from the EPP group. Pieter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the Undersecretary of Italy, grazie mille. You just answered to Mr. Chope that all options are possible, including expulsion of the Russian Federation. Now, I've got news for you. The Assembly just adopted the following text. The Assembly considers that the Russian Federation can no longer remain a member of the member state of the Council of Europe. What other options are possible? Is there any option, any, after Putin has now bombed for about 3 weeks Ukraine, damaged hospitals, caused thousands of deaths, now starving to death and depriving of drinking water people in Mariupol? Is there really any other option possible than expelling Russia from the Council of Europe? And if so, what more does Putin need to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Omtzigt. And to clarify, not the Assembly has taken a decision, but there has been a decision in the Political Affairs Committee. Tomorrow we will take our decision. And now I call in the debate Mr. Guterres Limones from Spain, and he's a member of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. You have the floor, Antonio.
Gracias, señor presidente. He tenido un poquito de suerte.
Thank you very much, President. I've been quite fortunate in a way. I would like to first of all greet the Undersecretary of State representing Italy. 24th of February events, 25th of February, we decided in the Council of Europe to suspend Russia's right of representation. Quick action. And as you said, Undersecretary, a number of decisions have been taken and resolutions are on the table. A couple of questions to you, if I may. Does the Committee of Ministers intend to lodge an interstate application against the Russian Federation before the International Court to find a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights? Secondly, I'd like to ask you what actions the CM intends to take in order to protect the citizens of Russia in occupied territories if the Russian Federation were to leave the Council of Europe. Thank you.
Now I ask the Undersecretary to respond to these 5 questions.
Grazie, grazie, signor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, President. In response to Ms. Treese from France, this is the first question put. Tangible initiatives, as you know, well, it's difficult to achieve a concrete intervention given the war that is underway, something that would satisfy all of us, but we are working, and Mistress mentioned this, mentioned the long term. There is a legal framework, which means that via the presidency and with the involvement of the Secretary General and the Parliamentary Assembly, we have spoken to the Russian authorities calling for interim measures to be implemented, these measures that have been decided upon by the European Court. And this will have consequences, whatever decision is taken by the Russian government. This is something which was taken up by the question put by Mr. Gutierrez Limones from Spain. Action, that is to say, to protect Russian citizens were the Russian Federation completely to leave the Council of Europe and therefore no longer be subject to the court. This is a topic, a question that we have been asking ourselves, and I think we must ask ourselves. Now, we know that throughout these years, the Russian government and the Russian judiciary has never implemented the judgments of the court, and therefore, unfortunately, the Russian Federation, Russian citizens have not effectively been, that is to say, citizens that have apprised the court have not been able to enjoy effective remedy, effective protection of their human rights as such. And it is therefore clear that from this point of view, the assessment that needs to be made is a comprehensive one. Unfortunately, there has not been an effective, this has not been an effective tool for the protection of human rights. This we have seen in recent days, the arrests and the arbitrary detentions that are underway, and the most conspicuous violations of freedom of speech and the freedom to demonstrate, the freedom of assembly in the main cities of Russia, Moscow, St. Petersburg, but elsewhere too. And I would like to take this opportunity to, as the promoter of human rights, I would like to express my gratitude as well as my admiration for the people in Russia who are peacefully protesting, holding up banners, knowing that in doing this, they run the risk of being arrested. And I would like to express my admiration for those citizens, in Ukraine, Ukrainian citizens, who have also found the strength to demonstrate right in the face of Russian tanks and demanding that their towns and cities that their soldiers be freed. In the Committee of Ministers, there is the request of the Committee of Ministers to free Mr. Navalny, who is still pursuing his initiative to support the mobilization of public opinion. And unfortunately, our request to the Russian authorities has not been followed up at all. It's been completely ignored. I would now like to answer the question put by Mr. Zingeris on behalf of Lithuania. And when it comes to supporting the activities of European associations for the good of children, I would like to say that from the point of view of European Union countries, there is the European Directive 55 for extraordinary situations, and this directive provides for a full visa for people who are coming, in this case, from Ukraine, and that visa can be extended, and it gives them an opportunity to work, etc. And it means that the children can go to school. Their children can go to school. Now, of course, this is not easy to organize, but from Italy's point of view, as soon as children arrive, they are welcomed in Italian schools. And this is to make sure that they don't lose touch with education. And there is the practical question of organizing the pursuit of the curriculum for these children. I would now like to answer the question put by Mr. Mularczyk from Poland. And I would like once again to express my and our gratitude, the gratitude of the Committee of Ministers for what Poland in particular is doing in welcoming refugees. It is clear that most of the refugees, that the burden of welcoming refugees has fallen upon Poland, and there are also other neighboring countries, of course, who are involved in welcoming refugees. And the question is what to do to spare lives, and how to use goods that have been confiscated for the good of refugees. As I was saying, in Italy, we have looked at using funds confiscated from organized crime. And the British have also suggested using confiscated resources in a context that must be in keeping with the rule of law, that we must naturally follow the rule of law and existing laws. But as you were saying, there is progress in countries that are confiscating property. I'm thinking of Italy, which I know best, as to how to use the confiscated goods for the benefit of refugees now and in future. And this could be used inter alia for the rebuilding of the country. Now, this rebuilding must be the rebuilding of a free, democratic law on the basis of the rule of law. And last but not least, what other options are possible I have no intention of holding back. I have a very clear personal idea of how we should proceed, but Italy holds the presidency of the Committee of Ministers, and this means that this is a decision that will be taken by the Committee of Ministers. And I would like to underline once again, by way of conclusion, that the Committee of Ministers, at least from the point of view of the Italian presidency, but I think from the point of view of the majority point of view of the Committee of Ministers, that the request made by the Assembly, the opinion of the plenary, will be taken into account properly. That is to say, the decision to expel the Russian Federation. And therefore, when it comes to the meeting of the Committee of Ministers on the 17th of March, understand that there are already texts on the table, but the presidency will naturally wait until tomorrow, until plenary adopts a resolution before it makes further steps and before a decision is taken. We will, above all, take into account your opinion.
That we will prepare tomorrow and finally decide tomorrow evening will be of relevance for the final decision to be taken by your Committee of Ministers. May I thank you for the cooperation until now, and we will stay in touch together with you and the Secretary General. Now I would like, and I'm sorry for those who are on the speakers list but could not take the floor because we are running out of time. Now the last item of business on our agenda is to listen to our Secretary General, Madam Maria Martinovic-Bjuric, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. We do not need to introduce you, Maria. You have been elected by this Assembly in this job, and you never could have imagined that one day you should have to address us in these sad circumstances. But I'm glad that you're working hard and that you're very much involved in doing whatever this organization can do. So without further delay, I would like to give you the floor, and you will answer questions after your introductory remarks. You have the floor, Madam Secretary General.
Thank you, President. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, distinguished parliamentarians, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I begin by paying tribute to Prime Minister Shmyhal for his powerful address this afternoon. These are hard days for Ukraine. But the Ukrainian government's determination was clear from his words and evident from the way in which his administration and the Ukrainian people have responded to the terrible acts of violence that continue in their country. We stand with them. This session of the Parliamentary Assembly was neither foreseen nor one that any one of us would have wanted. The Russian Federation's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, one Council of Europe member state on another, is shocking and it is appalling. We have all seen the harrowing images in recent days. Mothers and children leaving partners and fathers, transformed into refugees, fleeing for their lives. Frail older people struggling across makeshift plank bridges, replacing the structures that have been destroyed. The remains of Mariupol maternity hospital, bombed last week, killing civilians and injuring children, pregnant women, and doctors who look after them. Above all else, this is a tragedy for Ukraine. It is Ukraine's civilians who are taking up arms against an aggressor that has invaded their country, their homes that are subject to unprovoked and devastating attacks, their blood that is being spilled in the streets. Our thoughts are with all these people, but thoughts are not enough. It is incumbent on all of us to do what we can to support Ukraine in concrete terms too. This is true for the governments, for parliamentarians, and for the international organizations in which they are represented. I was clear from the beginning of the attack that Russia's actions are a flagrant violation of the Council of Europe Statute. The speed and manner in which both of our statutory organs addressed this issue was impressive. And after consultations with the Parliamentary Assembly, I'm pleased that the Committee of Ministers was able to agree on the suspension of Russia's representation so clearly and so quickly. They were the very day after the attack began. On both this and a subsequent resolution on legal and financial implications, I wrote promptly to Foreign Minister Lavrov, informing him of these measures and thereby bringing them into effect. As it stands, the Russian Federation is now suspended from the Committee of Ministers itself, the steering committees and subordinate committees, and from bodies such as CEPEJ and the Judges and Prosecutors Councils. The country is neither represented in the Congress, nor, as you know, in this very Parliamentary Assembly. But it does remain a party to those conventions that it has ratified. As such, it is bound by their obligations and can participate in the work of the bodies set up under these treaties. Crucially, they include the most important of all, the European Convention on Human Rights. This means that Russia is still subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights and has a legal obligation to implement and execute its judgments. Similarly, it is its duty bound to abide by the Rule 39 interim measures decided by the court on the 1st and 4th of March. These are not mere technicalities. Rather, they are stark reminders, instructions to the Russian Federation about what it must and must not do by law to respect human rights on the ground in Ukraine. That there should be no military attacks on civilians or civilian objects, and that the safety of medical establishments, personnel, and emergency vehicles should be ensured, that civilian population should have unimpeded access to safe evacuation routes and to healthcare, food, and other essential supplies. And fourth, that there should be rapid and unconstrained passage for humanitarian aid and the movement of humanitarian workers. We cannot be physically present to engage these measures, but we can spell them out as law-rooted in moral obligation and be crystal clear that the Russian Federation must respect them. This brings us to the matter that you are considering this week. Since the decision to suspend Russia's representation was taken on 25th February, its authorities have neither withdrawn from our organization nor stepped back from their brutal campaign in Ukraine. The serious violation of Article 3 of our statute remains. It is for our Committee of Ministers, our member states, to determine what, if anything, should now be done, whether to leave the suspension in place or ask Russia to withdraw. But in line with the statute, they are rightly seeking the opinion of this Parliamentary Assembly about what the next step should be. I know that you will consider the issue carefully, and I too look forward to hearing your conclusions. Over the past 2 weeks, in dealing with this matter, our organization has demonstrated strength and unity at a time where these are profoundly needed. And I'm grateful to you, President, to the leadership of the parliamentary groups, and to all members who continue to play a constructive role in finding the best way forward. Certainly, there will be difficult times ahead, but our objectives will not change. The Council of Europe exists to protect and promote European standards in human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, to the benefit of every citizen. Where those standards are set aside, where positions take precedence over people, injustice sets in, sometimes with truly terrible consequences. We see this today in the violence inflicted on Ukraine and its people. But we also see it in the Russian Federation itself, a state where opposition politicians are wrongly imprisoned, where independent journalists are intimidated, shut down, and silenced, where peaceful anti-war protest is prevented through crackdowns and mass arrests. This is a country whose suffering does not compare with Ukraine's, but it is nonetheless a state whose citizens' fundamental rights are being taken from them. And if the inevitable conclusion of current events is that the Russian Federation leaves the Council of Europe, this too will be a tragedy of sorts. A tragedy for the Russian people, who will no longer be protected by the European Convention, no longer be able to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, and no longer be part of our pan-European family. It will be a country led into darkness. The lesson from all of this is that where our standards fracture, people suffer. And we must redouble our efforts to ensure that our values and our organization remain central to life on our continent.
To be strong, the Council of Europe needs adequate resources. The Russian Federation is legally bound to meet its financial commitments in accordance with our programme and budget 2022-2025. A first payment should have been made a fortnight ago, but it has not been received. The full amount still outstanding should be paid by June. Whatever happens, in any case, we will make projections to assess the possible impact of the non-payment of these amounts on the programme and budget, and we will identify the measures that would need to be taken if this scenario were to occur. I am pleased, nevertheless, that some countries have already stated that the Council of Europe should not be financially penalised as a result of the decision to suspend the representation of the Russian Federation. These statements are most welcome. Given the pressures exerted on our values today, it would be wrong to reduce the capacity of this organisation to act. And therefore, I would like to pay tribute here today to the efforts made by you, Mr. President, and by your colleagues, in particular Mr. Schwab and Mr. Mayer, to ensure the financial stability of our organisation. I am grateful to you for that. If our finances are stable, this will allow us to continue with our activities, and the need for these activities is obvious here in Strasbourg, of course, but also and above all on the ground, where our collective efforts are of crucial importance. For obvious reasons, our capacity to implement cooperation activities on the ground in Ukraine is now severely limited. Having said that, we are also taking other specific measures in order to help people who are in distress. These include support for member states to take care of refugees arriving from Ukraine. Our Commissioner for Human Rights and my Special Representative on Migration and Refugees are doing their utmost to help improve the situation considerably, as is our development bank, which has made a significant financial contribution to Ukraine. We are also working on a series of priority measures that could be implemented as soon as the armed conflict has ceased. We attach great importance to Ukraine. In particular, we are committed to assisting Ukraine adapting to changing circumstances as they arise. Once Ukraine emerges from this conflict, it will need the Council of Europe all the more in order to rebuild a strong democracy to serve its people. Just recently, at the end of last year, I paid an official visit to Ukraine. I visited its administrative border with Crimea. I met with members of local non-governmental organizations. I was deeply moved by what they had to tell me. I told them that I would do everything within the mandate of our organization to ensure that everyone's human rights are respected. And I really meant everything that I said to them. We were there, on the ground, before this outbreak of violence. And we will be there when the violence has stopped, to accompany the people, to be with them as closely as possible, together with them. Finally, allow me to say a few words about our own staff. In these difficult times, we are doing everything we can to help our Ukrainian colleagues and their families. We are working to ensure that the salaries of the field office staff are paid, and I have given instructions so that the contracts of all local staff in Kiev be immediately extended until the end of this year. Wherever possible, and whenever this has been requested, we have also facilitated the movement of these colleagues and their relatives to neighbouring countries to seek shelter. And as for Ukrainian staff working in Strasbourg and in other duty stations, we have made sure to provide the same support to their families and their relatives in Ukraine. 2 minibuses were sent from Strasbourg to the European Youth Centre in Budapest, and from there we coordinated efforts in order to transport colleagues from the Ukrainian border. Colleagues, as I speak to you about all this, I am well aware of the powerlessness of words in the face of the enormity of this situation. Nothing that we can say will ease the pain of those who have lost their homes, their livelihoods, or their loved ones. The Council of Europe is not a security organization. And let us be clear, it will not be the Council alone that will stop the aggression that is taking place right now. What we can do, and what each of us must do, is to examine our conscience. We need to ask ourselves how we can do the right thing. What influence can we bring to bear in order to make things happen and move forward? We are all here today because we believe in a Europe where peace is based on justice. A Europe where, through international cooperation, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law flourish. Over the decades, and despite enormous difficulties, we have seen this culture take root and flourish in many places throughout our continent. What we see unfolding in Ukraine today is the hell that could come to pass if these values were to wither away. That is why, for the years to come, we must nurture these values. We must take care of these values for the sake of every single European. And for the time being, we stand by the Ukrainian people. We stand by our Ukrainian colleagues, and we give them our support and our solidarity. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Madame la Secrétaire Générale. Maintenant, we are going to take...
And now...
In order to save some time, and after these 5 speakers, Madam Secretary General, please respond as precise as possible, and then we can take some more questions. First, I call in a debate on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens, Madam Yulia Lvochkina from Ukraine. Yulia, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, just now during this discussion, about 20 minutes ago, I received messages from 2 of my friends in the city of Kharkiv. Houses of 2 of my comrades have been bombed and practically destroyed. And an hour ago, a relative of mine who is in Kiev at the moment sent me pictures of the flying rockets. So the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine presents a threat to the whole of Europe. And this has to be addressed rather sooner than later. So my question to you, what are your thoughts on a new possible architecture of our common European security?
Thank you, Yulia. Now I call in a debate on behalf of the EPP group, Madam Lisa Jasko from Ukraine. Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you. As you said in your speech, thousands of people don't have homes right now, and children, elderly women, everyone in need are waiting for humanitarian corridors that unfortunately are not happening successfully because the bombs and shellings continue. My question is what the organization and assembly can do, and you personally, to ensure that the humanitarian corridors are happening. And when will you be able to come to Ukraine to look it through your own eyes? Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, I call on behalf of the ECDA group from the United Kingdom, John Howell. John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Madam Secretary General, I would like to look to the future a little. What does this crisis say about the future of multilateralism in Europe? And a similar question to my socialist colleague earlier. What changes will this make for the better for the Council of Europe?
Thank you, John. Now, on behalf of the ALDE group, I give the floor to Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine. Yevgenia, you got the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, Madam Secretary General, we have to be frankful here. Council of Europe did fail to prevent this war of aggression in any way. So my question is, what conclusions can we draw from this situation? How the architecture of Council of Europe can be adjusted? And another question, and very, very important one, do you have, and what is the action plan of Secretary General to do something in this situation, to be on the ground, and what Council of Europe can do to be on the ground in the matter of refugees, in the matter of High Commissioner of Human Rights, in any other cases that we can do, because we have to be active. Thank you.
Thank you, Yevgenia. And now call as the last speaker on behalf of the political groups, on behalf of the UEL group, Madam Laura Castel from Spain. Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The right to seek refugee and asylum is applicable to all, regardless of race or origin. We must avoid racializing human rights and ensure that the principles of equal treatment and protection are applied to all. We've seen increasing reports of racist violence and discrimination against the students from Africa, Asia, and Middle East when fleeing Ukraine. And Council of Europe has an obligation to ensure protection to all. Race, skin color, or ethnicity does not make us less worthy of protection. War is always a devastating experience, and we must ensure that all people that seek refuge can be protected and given full access to their rights without being discriminated on the basis of race or nationality. What concrete steps you will take to avoid this outrageous situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Madam Secretary General, please, could you react to these 5 questions on behalf of the political groups?
Yes, thank you. I think some of the questions actually overlap, so I will try not to repeat the answer from one to the other. So the issue of the new architecture has arisen from several speakers, and I would like, when it comes to the Council of Europe, I can say that what we can learn from this terrible experience that we are still going through, or Ukraine is going through, and we, as a multilateral organization that has Ukraine as our member, if we succeed to continue unitedly and strongly as we this time are on this issue, the Council of Europe will be strengthened. And if we succeed with that, then I think understanding what is Council of Europe doing and why will help actually make our standards be applied in all our member states throughout 47 or 46 possibly in the future. So I think if we understand this very message, that the values and standards need to be respected everywhere, that if we fail with that, and as we see the failure very clearly and where it can lead to, then we would certainly make Council of Europe able to respond to any of the future crises or future challenges that we may have. So that also leads me to the answer of what is the role of multilateralism. If you recall, 2 years ago, my annual report was dedicated partially to the multilateralism. And it was a response to the crisis we were going to, or we are still going through, which is the crisis due to COVID. But the multilateralism was also challenged by many other things. And again, as it goes for the Council of Europe, that goes for me to all multilateral fora. Since the Second World War, the commitment to multilateralism secured peace and security relative. There were some wars around Europe, but relatively, we succeeded to keep going on in peace and security. And this is why this very decision, that your opinion of tomorrow, and then consequent decisions or decision by the Committee of Ministers will be crucial, because if we this time send a clear message, I think that would be a very strong message to the multilateralism in general. So the value of multilateralism is very clear to me in this time of the crisis, and only recommitting to it and living it effectively in all of our member states would be right way to continue to ensure prosperity to all our citizens. So I think, yes, the multilateralism has been in crisis, not only because of this war, it was for several and many reasons, but I think with this very blatant aggression and war that is ravaging one of our member states, probably the message can be stronger and I hope can reach all of our policymakers and all of our citizens, so that together we make sure that first this terrible aggression stops, and then that we recommit to the multilateralism and the work for better Europe and better life for our citizens. Now for whether do we have action plan for Ukraine? We did have, or we do have, an action plan that was in place, but as I said in my speech, for obvious reasons, it cannot be completely or in a great part applied now. Though there are some requests that we still help some of the branches of power in Ukraine. However, knowing that we are certainly going to a new phase of work with Ukraine, I asked already my colleagues to set a set of measures that could be applied in Ukraine immediately, as I said again in my speech, when the atrocities are behind us and when we will together work on building a democratic and prosperous Ukraine again. So we are working on that. We are doing at this moment what we can, and we will do certainly much more in the future. Just for you to know that so far our action plan and our office, local office in Kiev, was absolutely the biggest one that we have. And from what I see, from needs that I can foresee, I think it will continue to be so in the future. So now, for specific questions related to the things that are going on the terrain, mainly to refugees, how do we go about it? You mentioned rightly the Commissioner for Human Rights. Obviously, you may know that she is independent in her work, so I cannot say, or no one can say what the Commissioner should do. I'm very certain that she has a number of things on her mind. She already visited, as you may well know, some of the neighboring countries of Ukraine that have so wholeheartedly accepted refugees from Poland that came literally overnight in millions from Ukraine to those places. She was notably in Moldova, but I know that her plans certainly encompass some other member states. When it comes to my special representative for migrants and refugees, she already started the coordination among what we call focal points in all of our member states in order to see, and in particular for those countries who are now in the front line of those who are receiving refugees from Poland, what can be done and what we as the Council of Europe can further do. So we are certainly going to consider what more we can do. But I must say here something that I think also the chair of the Committee of Ministers mentioned. We are not humanitarian organizations, so we cannot do what other international, and we are not, it's just not our mandate what others do, but we are concerned by a number of issues that are raised within this. And to the question of possible or allegedly discrimination to some people coming from some nationalities, I can only reiterate, European Convention on Human Rights, it's very clear. So it needs to be applied to anyone that finds itself on the territory of the country that has signed and ratified European Convention on Human Rights. So from what I know, I can again pay tribute to all the surrounding countries that they have taken so many refugees in so short time. I have been in contact with some ministers from those countries, and from what I heard from them, I haven't understood that there was a discrimination. But in my statements, and I did make quite a few, unfortunately, since the outbreak of this war from 24th of February. I always first thanked all the countries that are giving the refuge for those who are in need. At the same time, underlining two aspects. One is non-discrimination of any kind, and the other is to pay special attention to those that may find themselves in a vulnerable situation. And those are in contemporary wars, most often they are women and girls, but also other vulnerable people. So I made also on the International Day of the Protection of Women's Rights, I made a specific aside of one of general nature, but one that is dedicated to Ukrainian women and girls finding themselves in that situation. So I completely agree with you. The shelling and bombing makes no difference on whom is inflicted. So anyone can be a target. So all people should be protected and taken care of when they found themselves as refugees. I hope.
Thank you very much.
I answered.
I think you answered the five questions. As we are running out of time, I only can give the floor to 3 more speakers on the list. First, I call in the debate Madam Maria Mezensova from Ukraine. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President. Madam Secretary General, as becoming an IDP myself and witnessing how my colleague counterparts, their families, and many more in Ukraine are becoming refugees, I don't have a question, I have a kind request to you. Recently, within this couple of weeks of war, several generous volunteers have united their efforts in IT sector, and they created a platform which is called Stand Up Ukraine. It was presented to your team earlier today. It unites donors, volunteers, governments, countries, and everyone who can be in the system of help. I highly ask to review this possibility, because this is something what the work that already has been done and can be of a great help to us in the institution and to you personally with your team. We do hope that the peace will prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Now, prochaine oratrice, Madame Nicole Duranton de la France.
Madame Nicole Duranton from France. Madam Secretary General, the war launched by Russia in Ukraine is a shock for Europe, and it reminds us of dark hours. I would like at this time to express my solidarity to the Ukrainian people. The Russian Federation has had its right of representation suspended on February 25th. You presented to the Committee of Ministers the consequences, legally and financially, of that decision. Today, the Parliamentary Assembly is called upon to speak out as to a possible future use of Article 8 of the statute of the organization. The spokesman of the Kremlin himself mentioned withdrawal from the Council of Europe. Let's be clear, after this action, Vladimir Putin's Russia cannot remain a member of our organization. And please believe that I deplore this for Russian citizens who we must not forget. Madam Secretary General, what is your margin of maneuver today, as long as Russia is still a party to the European Convention of Human Rights? And what action may you undertake to deal with the crisis of refugees and displaced persons? What consequences do you draw from this major crisis in terms of the functioning of the Council of Europe, so that tomorrow it may once again be fully able to promote democratic security in Europe? I thank you. Thank you, Nicole.
By Madam Marta Grande from Italy, as at 6 o'clock the political groups have to start their meetings. Marta, you have the floor. We cannot hear you. Are you muted? Please try again. We do not hear you. Can we solve the problem? You are still muted. This does not work, Marta, and this is a big pity because you also tried in the Bureau to ask a question to the Secretary General. Give it one more try. No. Could you send, no. Sorry, it's not going to function, Marta. We cannot hear you. Sorry, the technique is not functioning. Madam Secretary General, you have 2 more questions to answer before we close this session.
Thank you very much. Now for the question, or rather plea to see this project that Madam Menzitsever mentioned. Of course, I haven't seen this, and I may assume that tomorrow meeting the ambassador of Ukraine may be the opportunity to talk on this as well. Of course, we will, from our side, we will do whatever is possible. However, knowing that our limitations, as I try to explain in the speech, are visibly there, but in the areas where we can, we will certainly do our utmost. Maintenant, pour la question de Madame Duranton, merci beaucoup de vos propos.
Moving on to Mrs. Duranton's question, first of all, thank you for your kind comments. I think I did mention refugees at quite some length. I talked about democratic safety in Europe and security, and I think I can agree with you, Madam. I agree with you when you say that it is the central role of our organization to do that as a Council of Europe. One of our key missions is to make sure that our standards are applied, are implemented, human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And we are there in order to facilitate that, to help achieve democratic security. And if you ask me what the role of the Council of Europe is, I think you can explain it precisely from that vantage point. It is all about our democracies and the robustness and security of our democracies. I know that there are other international organizations. These other international organizations have a different mandate, a mission, namely that of security in the proper sense of the term. But without democratic security, they won't be able to achieve those objectives. So in a way, the work that we do here in this House, in the Council of Europe, on democratic security, that is actually key. It is essential and pivotal to make sure that our member states and almost all countries that are members of our organization can achieve this. So all I can say in response to your question is that any adjustments that may need to be made to the security architecture in the proper sense of the term, any amendments, any tweaking needs to be focused on democratic security too. It needs to be center stage. So I think that answers your question. I think in my speech as well, I made reference to this earlier on. I did mention that as things stand right now, it's actually difficult to imagine, after all these days of aggression, to imagine that you could actually sleep soundly at night. But of course, there is this institution within the Council of Europe that is responsible for decisions. You, of course, will be making up your minds tomorrow. You'll have a debate, you'll take a decision, and then it will be up to the Committee of Ministers to decide what happens next. But of course, it's difficult. It's difficult to anticipate, to imagine. As you might imagine, of course, we would like to have a pan-European organization, an organization that covers the whole continent. It's difficult to imagine that that could really be the case if things stay as they are. You did mention earlier on that there have been announcements made by the Russian side, by spokespersons. To be perfectly honest, it wasn't very clear. It wasn't clear whether they would be leaving or not. I think the spokesperson was saying that it is something that might happen. At least that's my reading of the statement. I would actually prefer for them to read other messages that are coming out of here that we're sending out. You know, the messages consistently have been stop aggression, stop the war, and come back to dialogue and diplomacy. That's been the constant message. We haven't seen anything to that effect so far. And once again, all I can do is therefore renew that request. Stop this war. Stop this aggression. Come back to dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the fact that you answered our questions. Many questions remain, many answers still to have to be given, but you made it clear that one answer to many questions is already there. That is stop the war and stop it now. Tomorrow we are going to debate all day. There will be, as I said, a record number of speakers in that debate. I'm looking forward to it. I thank Secretary General, Chair of the Committee of Ministers, and the Prime Minister of Ukraine for updating us today. Tomorrow we can use that information and additional information to discuss the proposal made by the Political Affairs Committee. For now, the sitting is adjourned. We will come back at 9:30 tomorrow morning.